SMEE is one of my all-time favorite visual novel developers. It's on my current top 10 favorite VN devs, as I noted in a previous video from 2025, though I'd probably rank them even higher now. However, I realized I actually don't have any videos where I specifically review any of their titles or have a video focused on anything related to them, so I want to change that. In this video, I'm going to rank all 7 translated SMEE visual novels from worst to best. There is a chance you may be wondering what SMEE is. Well, SMEE is a moege rom-com focused visual novel developer that specializes in having quirky, silly comedy with a lot of yelling, random commentary, savage roasting, but somehow are able to mix that with down-to-earth, wholesome romance stories. SMEE's humor style definitely sticks out and has little to no generic anime harem rom-com tropes, and to me it very much helps them stick out. They mostly tend to avoid anything supernatural to spice up their settings. Instead, they generally try to have gimmicks that are surprisingly unique for modern Japan rom-coms, which I'll note when talking about each individual VN. With that, let's start from the bottom. Sugar Style is unfortunately easily my least favorite of SMEE's translated visual novels to date. A big part of why is that I had high expectations because it's one of the few visual novels that fully takes place in a university setting. The only other translated VNs that I can think of that fully take place in university are Futamata Renai by Asa Project, White Album 1 by Leaf and Aqua Plus, and to a lighter extent, Cafe Stella by Uzusoft. To me, Sugar Style is sadly just the worst VN that takes place in university out of the ones I listed. On paper, it does attempt the usual SMEE tropes with a lot of goofy, sometimes perverted comedy, and even has interesting specific choice-related gimmicks on the surface. Unfortunately, I just think Sugar Style executes all of SMEE's usual tropes in the worst way. A huge turnoff for me was at the beginning of the common route, where the main protagonist walks in on the heroines taking a bath at the dorm. Something like this does not happen in any other SMEE game I've read, including another SMEE title I'll mention later. This accidental pervert shit is the most boring, generic, unfunny trope that has existed since the 2000s, and in my opinion, has gotten way old and overused. But these set of jokes at the beginning causes the Sugar Style MC to, in my opinion, not have great chemistry with most of the heroines, especially Mao, who keeps being kind of tsundere towards the main character just because of these stupid misunderstandings. However, that's not the only issue I have with the common route. It just has a bunch of weird systems that ultimately feel useless, uninteresting, and pad out an already unfunny common route. The choosing a job thing to do at the dorm sounds fun on paper, but just leads to a bunch of unorganized slice of life scenes that don't mean anything. Sugar Style also does a weird thing where there are heroine route chapters in the common route. So in a way, you're starting a heroine route early, but these scenes are not consistent with the actual common route writing. So it just feels like a weird way to try to gauge which heroine to eventually choose, but I just thought the execution was just really janky and made the common route even more of a drag. But even if we removed the dumb accidental pervert jokes, the humor just also really isn't that good in general, especially by the side characters like Erica, who I don't even know why she shows up. She's just an unfitting, annoying little kid. The bro university characters are also just kinda lame. Literally, the one saving grace of Sugar Style to me is Kaname. She does the mischievous, quirky troll character archetype pretty decently, being one of the few characters to at least kind of consistently make me chuckle. But I don't think she's an amazing heroine. She would probably be a mid-tier at best heroine in most other SMEE games. But when she's carrying the entire cast on her shoulders, that's not a good look. Even her route isn't anything special romance-wise to me. Overall, Sugar Style is just in the top 10 most disappointing visual novels I've ever read. It's the one title I sadly dislike by a developer that I otherwise really like. The only conclusion I can think of for why this title is really disappointing is because one of the major writers for most of my favorite SMEE VNs, Yu Hayase, was not involved in Sugar Style at all, which made me wonder if this writer was really the one carrying all the SMEE VNs up to this point. Fulelaba is a title I have some nostalgia for, since it's the first SMEE title I ever read and the first visual novel I read translated by Nekonyan. So in a way, Fulelaba kind of set the standard of what I expect from SMEE. I've seen some mixed opinions on the protagonist, but I generally found him pretty funny in a purposefully over-the-top degenerate way. In addition to the protagonist Kyosuke's silly outbursts, I thought the way he trolled Yuzuyu and even has consistent playful dialogue with Rina and occasionally the other bro characters was usually pretty fun. Speaking of which, I would say the main heroines are slightly something of a mixed bag for me. They're all likable enough, but there's only one that really stood out to me, which was Rina. To me, she embodied the friend to lover subtitle of Fulelaba the best, since she was the closest to the protagonist at the beginning of the game. So her transition into romance is not only the most natural and interesting, but Rina also by far has the highest amount of depth of all the 4 main heroines. It's just unfortunate that it was saved until the very end of her route. The other 3 heroines were perfectly fine, but nothing special. Himari is honestly kind of a basic, quote-unquote, forgotten childhood friend to me. Yuzuyu is a tsundere that kind of switches to dere mode a little too quickly once her route starts. Misaki felt a little bit too innocently naive for me, especially around her learning sexual stuff. I'm also a little bit hit or miss on the side characters. Genki can sometimes be kind of funny, but sometimes kind of annoying. Mochopi is definitely one of the oddest side bro characters I've seen from a VN, but I thought the gimmick of him just yelling his name out loud was usually funny enough. I thought the pseudo dating sim gameplay wasn't that good because of how annoyingly vague it is to properly increase affection points for the heroine you're talking to. I'll give SMEE props for at least trying something unique in an otherwise typical high school rom-com, but this system alone makes me not as interested to reread Fulelaba as much as the other SMEE VNs. Fulelaba may be the second lowest ranked SMEE VN on this list, but I still think it's a fun time, unlike Sugar Style. It can be a good starter SMEE VN if you want to see if you're into the developer's weird over-the-top humor style, but of all SMEE's catalog, I think Fulelaba is the most inconsistent quality-wise, and I would only recommend it if at least 1 or 2 of the heroines interest you. I'll very quickly throw in my thoughts on the Fulelaba fan disc, but it's really short. I'm talking each route is maybe 15 minutes tops, especially if you skip the H scenes. They are just short, mildly funny, and wholesome slice of life stories that lead to an H scene before ending. Nekonian customized their builds so you can access these after stories as DLC in the main game, but I'd only recommend getting this DLC if you really liked at least most of the heroines. Rabu Raburu is in an unfortunate spot since there's technically a 100% translated patch out there. However, the only people who can read it were part of the translation team, and it's currently stuck in editing hell. I was lucky enough to be hired to do QA for it and even found more issues to report and get fixed. But sadly, the current project manager is busy with university or something, so work on it hasn't been done on it since I completed testing for it all the way back in July 2025. But anyway, about Rabu Raburu itself. In Japan, it actually came out before Fulelaba, all the way back in 2011. I think this is the era when modern moege was finally starting to take off, and thankfully that includes Rabu Raburu, which before its release, SMEE had only sold a few not so well received VNs. I think Rabu Raburu is the perfect intro to SMEE VNs. It is a very solid mix of the memorable, goofy, over-the-top comedy, a likable cast of heroines, and mostly wholesome romance that I expect from SMEE. It also has a kinda unique cafe setting where, while the main character does go to high school sometimes, at least for half of his screen time, he and all the main heroines work at a beachside cafe with a lot of shenanigans about dealing with customers, figuring out good part-time shifts, and dealing with a hilariously incompetent manager. As far as the heroines go, they're an overall solid bunch, with Chinatsu being a goofy airhead, Nanako being a slightly older mature woman with interesting enough insecurities, Sugumi having a very memorable shy girl into assertive gap moe, and even Kaho, the token little sister character, is actually kind of funny since she has the quirky troll personality most SMEE protags have. In terms of tone and writing, Rabu Raburu in many ways feels like the definitive SMEE VN, with every route at least being memorable enough. However, there are a few issues that prevent it from me potentially calling it anywhere close to SMEE's overall best. The first is that Rabu Raburu is surprisingly short. I'm talking 15 to 20 hours to read all 5 routes, and a lot of that is just the common route, which is probably the best part of the game. The heroine routes aren't bad, but each route is maybe a few hours at most, with my favorite girl, the quirky Satsuki, barely having an hour at most, almost feeling like a pseudo side route. So basically, while Rabu Raburu gets the tone and writing just right, with a great mix of humor and wholesomeness, it just doesn't have the length to fully develop the heroines enough to really stick out unless you really like one of their personalities. But in all fairness, its short length is part of why I think Rabu Raburu is the best starter SMEE VN.
HajiLove Making Lovers.
The latest SMEE visual novel to be translated as of this video is HajiLove Making Lovers, or as it's localized on Steam, Making Lovers First Blush. This is basically a sequel in name only. It keeps Making Lovers' mechanics and even copies a lot of its assets, but has a completely new character cast. Minor spoilers, but let's just say the original Making Lovers ranks quite a bit higher on this list. First Blush kind of just feels like a weird cash grab, which is unusual for SMEE, as they usually prefer using new IPs for new releases and never do pseudo-sequels like this. First Blush is ultimately just another high school rom-com, which was really disappointing considering we already have way too many in the anime and VN mediums. Part of what made the original Making Lovers special was its emphasis on adult age dating and how the characters advanced their jobs and careers. Thankfully, despite my numerous reservations before starting it, I actually ended up liking Making Lovers First Blush. It certainly is no OG Making Lovers, but outside stealing a lot of its mechanics and even 90% of its soundtrack and backgrounds, First Blush manages to execute SMEE's writing style in its own unique way. The main thing that sticks out for me is that I actually legit liked all 4 main heroines. In every other SMEE title, there's usually at least one heroine I consider just okay or mediocre at best. Kota was a solid petite girl but with a mature older sister personality character without being pandering like Ushio from Marshmallow All the Way Home, since Kota's arc focused on her just being more selfish instead of focusing her life on her family. Yui, who could have potentially been an annoying energetic Gyaru, ended up being the funniest character for me, and her insecurity spot being herself were my overall favorite character arc. Hatsuho was basically the implied true route, and while it wasn't my personal favorite, due to some of the reveals being a bit too out there, especially in the supernatural sense, at least the route was decently funny and cute. The heroine who stood out the most to me was the childhood friend Sakurako. She may have the typical day-to-day housewifey loyal traits, but she just had this goofy grandma energy whenever she joked around with the main character, plus a lot of diabetes-inducing sweet romance dialogue. She was easily my favorite heroine and route in this VN. I thought First Blush, for better or for worse, focused a lot more on wholesome romantic development than on actual comedy, whereas most SMEE games try to have something of a 50-50 balance. That's not to say First Blush wasn't funny. There are definitely a solid amount of funny moments, but I usually just got a consistent amount of chuckles because the humor just wasn't as unhinged or insane, with much fewer random outbursts than usual. That kind of bummed me out, but I'll still take it over Sugar Styles' mediocre comedy at best across the board. While First Blush mostly steals mechanics and even the route structure from the original Making Lovers, the few new mechanics it did add around the blush meter, girlfriendology stat screens, and the quick heroine POV scenes were amusing and mostly optional if you don't care for them. Not the most standout gimmick from SMEE, but I thought it was fun enough. Even though I thought First Blush was a mostly worthy moege on its own, I can't help but feel like it played things a bit too safe for a SMEE title, especially considering it's sharing the Making Lovers name. The characters all being in high school was a bummer, not just because they were placed in the adult age setting, but ultimately, being in high school didn't add or change much since 3/4 of the heroines' routes take place while the characters are on summer break. Why couldn't this VN at least take place in a university setting to at least stick out a little bit more? While I did say I liked all 4 main heroines, I don't think any of them are going to be in the running for anyone's top favorite moege heroine of all time. There are better versions of these archetypes out there, whether in other SMEE VNs or other popular-ish moege. Overall, Making Lovers First Blush's consistency but over-reliance on playing it safe ultimately places it in the middle of the pack for me as far as translated SMEE VN rankings go. It would not be my first recommendation for a SMEE VN or a moege newbie, but if you just want SMEE's wholesome romance without the excessive quirky humor outside Hatsuho's route,
私のお尻の処女をもらってください。
you will probably like First Blush more than the others. Otherwise, just read it if you really like anything SMEE or lighthearted moege in general like me.
Harem Kingdom.
On paper, Harem Kingdom should be one of, if not the lowest of all the SMEE titles on this list. I'm not super into isekai as a premise based on the handful of anime isekai I watched, and I generally avoid polyamory titles, with only a very select few writers actually somehow able to make one guy date multiple girls at once kind of work in anime or VN form, without it just seeming like boring wish fulfillment without actual development. Harem Kingdom also came out right after Sugar Style, which I mentioned earlier easily had the worst humor from SMEE to date. So I was really hesitant on trying Harem Kingdom, but I eventually bit the bullet because I liked SMEE's other titles. Thankfully, my fears were mostly put to rest as Harem Kingdom is potentially the overall funniest SMEE title, a huge contrast to Sugar Style. Yu Hayase came back as the main writer, and I could not imagine a better one to make fun of an isekai used by a moege company. The main character gets summoned and has to marry 5 women to become king or something weird like that. Both the hilarity and wholesomeness that SMEE is known for somehow work excellent here. In my eyes, if you want to create a polyamory premise, in addition to a likable main character, which SMEE tends to do, you have to make all the main love interests likable or else the polyamory falls apart, because you're going to be seeing all these girls all the time. Thankfully, Harem Kingdom has one of the better balanced cast from SMEE to me. I still have my favorite girl from the bunch, which is easily Hikari, but I definitely don't dislike any of them. They have a diverse enough set of personalities, and the main character actually goes out of his way to individually recruit and make sure each heroine was okay with being in this polyamory relationship. The protagonist learning about the heroines and recruiting them was a really fun part of the common route. The constant banter between all the heroines were both hilarious and wholesome, which helped make the common route and all 5 routes consistently entertaining. Speaking of which, I also liked that the heroine route structure was extremely unique, taking advantage of the polyamory aspect. The harem gives ideas of what the group dynamic of the poly relationship ends up being, whether it's them openly competing with each other, all trying to be one happy family, or where the main character chooses to let the heroines decide everything in the relationship. Each route manages to low-key be single heroine focused by the end, where the last chapter tends to focus on small wholesome character development for the heroine that suggested said harem theme idea you ended up choosing. That said, just because Harem Kingdom made the best of 2 premises I don't care for, that does not mean I don't have issues with the title. I would not want SMEE to do another polyamory and or isekai premise because I just don't think it would be possible for them to do it again without eventually resorting to the boring tropes that tend to be used in more generic titles. Outside of Hikari, while I'm fine with all the heroines, I don't particularly love any of them. Because of the emphasis on the harem being the main characters' wives early on, there's a larger emphasis on H scenes compared to most SMEE titles. The protagonist could have sex with just one of them, or 2 at a time, or very occasionally 4 to 5 at the same time. If you like H scenes, you'll probably be fine with this, but as someone who mostly reads SMEE VNs for the funny jokes and romantic development, there's just a bit too many of these scenes for my liking that ended up just being story pace breakers, and I basically skipped all of them. When I read the Hikari route of the Fantastic Harem Janayo Kingdom, all this did was make me really sad Harem Kingdom could not have had the option for monogamy routes. This Fantastic's after stories seem to be a way to have the main heroines get their own single heroine focused route just like any other SMEE title, which made me realize the heroines all had potential to be great if they were in a modern adult age setting in Japan and not stuck in some random fantasy world making harem jokes. Ultimately, this does make Harem Kingdom a title I really like, mostly purely because they do the comedy really well and somehow make the best of a polyamory premise, being chill and wholesome. But when I think of moege I want to reread, a polyamory isekai is not exactly at the top of my list, even if it is by a company I really like. Love Pickle Poppy, aka SMEE's newest visual novel as of this video, is one I admittedly had reservations going in due to the new pastel art-like style, the fact that at the time it was being handled by a brand new translation team in Kagami Games, and most importantly, I thought SMEE was just a bit hit or miss once I was heavily disappointed by Sugar style. Thankfully, Love Pickle Poppy seemed to be a big enough success in Japan, and in my opinion is definitely the best of their newer titles. While maybe not the craziest comedy in the series, it definitely got a little zanier compared to stuff like Making Lovers First Blush, and apparently also over the other untranslated titles like 1-1 Kadashi Kanajo. But of course it also still keeps the wholesome slice-of-life romance that SMEE excels at. While I don't know if I'd go as far as to say Love Pickle Poppy has SMEE's overall best heroine cast, it's definitely one of the better ones. They're a surprisingly wholesome bunch, none of them being super tropey, which is once again something I tend to find most SMEE VNs tend to get right. The main protagonist, Tetsuya, is also a lot less perverted than usual. In fact, it's the heroines that are the ones to do more perverted things, whether it's Tamaki making a comment on the protagonist's manly musk while defending him, or Nozomi just being openly down bad in general. I was a little iffy on the protagonist being probably in his early 20s and being the dorm mother of an all-girls high school dorm, but thankfully there are almost no lame generic accidental pervert jokes the sugar-style writers could have learned from this. In fact, part of what made the common route really fun was the protagonist learning all the rumors' quirks, and it was nice seeing how all of them legitimately slowly warmed up to the main character, who generally did a good job being a gentleman, but occasionally had some goofy snark here and there. While the cast is generally likable, and Love Pickle Poppy as a whole is a solid, fun read, the main thing that prevented it from being an all-time favorite moege for me is the VN's structure. 6 shortish heroine routes with a relatively long common route, which made for somewhat imbalanced pacing. The common route definitely felt like it could have been shortened by a few chapters to make room for more heroine route development. I also felt like they could have rebalanced things to have 4 to 5 longer main heroine routes instead of 4 main routes and 2 side routes. Hell, Ayako had some of the best writing route-wise in this VN for me because it was just purely 2 adult age characters learning to communicate maturely, but being stuck as a side route meant it felt limited in its potential development. I would have easily gotten rid of the Tampopo and Suzuka routes just to make Ayako's route alone longer and better. I'm already not really a fan of incest routes, and it's unfortunate that the token little sister character Suzuka was actually pretty likable and funny as a non-romantic side character. She has character development in the common route that literally gets ruined if you go on her heroine route by changing one thing about her just to pander to incest fanboys. You guys already have a bazillion forbidden romance incest routes in eroge. It could have been fine to just have a platonic, likable sister character for once. Finally, as far as the gameplay gimmicks go, while the thought bubble gimmick was amusing at first, the fact that you have to stop what you're doing, click to find out the heroine is most likely thinking what you'd expect, ends up just being an annoying story pace breaker. The optional thing in the common route where you can see what the heroines are up to every night at the dorm was at least fun enough though. Those complaints aside, Love Pickle Poppy is definitely one of the better modern 2020s moege to come out. Every heroine route I did not complain about, aka Ayako, Miyu, Tamaki, and Nozomi, were very fun. It's nice to know that SMEE moege seem to have a future even without Yu Hayase. Quick side note, I can understand why some people thought Nozomi was a bit too much or outright annoying, but I thought she was great, being a hilarious down bad dede pervert with one of the funniest H-scene build-up moments I've seen in a VN. As well as her route easily having the best, most wholesome route ending in Love Pickle.
Making lovers.
My number one favorite SMEE visual novel to this day is still pretty easily the original Making Lovers. Not only do I think it's my favorite SMEE title, as it has the best balance of hilarious comedy and wholesome romance, I also think Making Lovers is in the running for my all-time favorite moege because of how well it executes everything I expect from a lighthearted slice-of-life rom-com. Naturally, the main sticking point and gimmick of this game is the adult age dating thing, which for some reason is still incredibly rare in VNs and even anime to this day. For translated moege, the only ones I can think of are Chihiro Himikai developed by SMEEde, which coincidentally is written by the Making Lovers writer, Yubisaki Connection by Hooksoft, which Nekonyan will have its translation probably in years from now, and I guess if you want a more dramatic version, there's The Most Forbidden Love in the World by Hermit, where the main protagonist and all the non-true heroines are adult age. But you get my point. For some reason, because Japan really simps for their high school days, there's a consistently strong emphasis on high school rom-coms in the anime and VN mediums. So just the fact that SMEE was apparently one of the few with the balls to actually try a modern adult age rom-com and have it be successful and popular is a testament that has to be commended. At the same time, it's kind of sad that they haven't really stuck to trying more of these adult age settings. However, just because a VN has adult age characters, that would not automatically make it good or appealing to most people, because there are certainly nukige or sex-heavy VNs that feature adults that many people would never touch, especially if they have NTR. Thankfully, as I opened with, Making Lovers also executes the perfect mix of hilarious comedy and wholesome romance, with a lot of very memorable skits thanks to crazy outbursts by the main character, all the main heroines, and even a lot of the random goofy side characters. While HajiLove or First Blush copied the super short common route and longer heroine routes formula almost exactly, I still think the original Making Lovers executed this concept much better as a whole. The fact that the common route is literally 15 to 30 minutes tops, depending on the choices you make, is extremely unique, and it actually makes sense. Making Lovers in a way emulates modern adult age IRL dating, where many people just kind of hook up really quick. Things just kind of click, and then you figure out the relationship from there. At least based on stories I've heard from others. I'm still single, by the way. Just the fact that you can start dating Saki, the almost 30-year-old woman, by the second or third choice and you're locked in is pretty wild, showing how an accidental hookup could lead to a surprisingly great match. Caught in as perhaps the not too uncommon trope of previous schoolmates meeting up as adults and things actually kind of taking off. And well, let's just say I know someone who straight up met someone similar to Mashiro IRL through a job, got asked out through said job, has a similar build and nerdy interest to Mashiro, which made me exceptionally jealous. But that's my point. Despite SMEE's tendency to go for goofy situations in an otherwise down-to-earth slice-of-life setting, the way the characters get together isn't completely unrealistic, and that's part of the fun of Making Lovers, geniusly combining the romance and the goofy humor almost perfectly. Once you get on a heroine route, you have roughly 5 to 7 hours of basically hanging out with just the heroine plus a few relevant side characters. I've noticed that many moege, including other ones by SMEE on this list, have this weird trap where they make their common routes too long, but then their heroine routes just end up being a bit short or disappointing. Thankfully, Making Lovers does not have that issue. If you like a heroine enough, you get a good amount of time to hang out with her, and because it has a great mix of the characters messing around and joking with each other, plus legitimate wholesome romantic moments and even some mild character development fitting of young adults trying to figure out a career path, it just combines everything that I like in the best way possible. The icing on the cake is the date system, with all 5 heroines There are 2 separate parts of each route where you can make choices of where you and your girlfriend hang out and eat for lunch or dinner. Each spot has unique dialogue complete with technically unnecessary but fun choices to spice up almost every date spot. I've been glazing the OG Making Lovers a lot and I do love it, but I do have to be fair and point out some of its flaws that ultimately keep it from being my #1 moege, even though it comes close. Notice how up until this point, I've barely talked about 2 of the main heroines, Akko and Reina. While I definitely don't dislike them as characters, they're definitely the weak links of this VN. The first issue is that they kind of break the adult age theme of this VN. Sure, they both have their own jobs and that's what they end up focusing on, but the fact is, they're both still seniors in high school, while every other character, including the main character Kazuma, is at least in their early to mid-20s, which creates an unnecessary age gap for Akko and Reina. That alone slightly brings down the consistency of me enjoying the actual romance part of this game. What doesn't help is that Akko is the main character's stepsister, and the VN low-key treats her as the true heroine based on some reveals towards the end of her route. In Reina's case, while she can be funny at times, usually I thought she was just kind of annoying and bratty, so I had mixed feelings on her. The fact that either or both of them could have been replaced by 1 or 2 very lovable side heroines in Akari or Kazumi, both actual adult age characters who are just as funny as the rest of the cast, is the unfortunate bad-tasting icing on an otherwise delicious cake. There are some other minor flaws, like how the main character Kazuma, while I do think he's funny and probably the best protagonist SMEE has ever made, can be a bit inconsistent. He can be a little bit too obnoxiously immature at times in Saki's route. His goal at finding a long-term job can vary incredibly depending on whose route it is, and even though I love Mashiro so much for being the closest to my ideal girl I'd want to date in real life because of her mix of being a funny weird girl with nerdy interests and surprisingly assertive romance, I was not a fan of the writing of a certain ring toss drama at the very end of her route. Thankfully, ultimately, my issues are but mere nitpicks compared to how much I consistently enjoyed Making Lovers. As I said multiple times earlier, it very much embodies my personal ideal of what I expect from a moege. A great mix of hilarious, goofy comedy to make sure things don't get too slow-paced, wholesome, down-to-earth romance without any unnecessary supernatural elements, so the self-inserting nature feels that much more relatable, and the little bits of character development almost every character gets helps you feel like there's at least legit progress in each romance, especially since you're going to be with the heroine for a little under 10 hours each time. To briefly comment on the Making Lovers fandisc Gekiicha after story, these just add on an extra 30 to 40 minutes of funny slice of life for each main heroine. There's nothing big that happens, but if you wanted to see more silly jokes and occasionally wholesome interactions between the main character Kazuma and the main heroines, definitely give it a shot. While I've ranked all the SMEE visual novels up to this point, I really want to rank all the main dateable heroines, but I don't want to double up the video length talking about each one individually. So instead, I'm just going to provide a tier list of me ranking them all in picture form. If you want to use a template to create your own SMEE heroine ranking, I'll have a link in the description. And with that, I've ranked every single translated SMEE visual novel from worst to best. Even with my least favorite sugar style, I think all of them to some degree represent my personal ideal for slice of life rom-com moege. A great mix of humorous, goofy, savage comedy with wholesome romance and memorable, unique characters. I look forward to motivating myself to learn Japanese, or hopium for anyone who translates the currently untranslated SMEE titles, aka Pure X Connect, Kanojo Step, 1/1 Karashi Kanojo, and all the fandiscs of the VNs I talked about in this video. If you have any opinions on SMEE visual novels or this video, feel free to leave a comment below.